That night, I was just standing at the fence talking to my neighbor about strange neighborhood fees. 5 minutes later, my stepfather stormed onto the porch like a hurricane. He thought the neighborhood was asleep, thought no one could hear. He didn't know every porch on this street had mics, cameras, and a neighborhood watch meeting streaming live. He didn't know our own doorbell camera was recording every threat. I didn't know either that his outburst would blow the lid off a hundreds of thousands embezzlement scheme, leading to a public collapse at Thursday night's resident meeting. My name is Ava Whitmore, and at 27, I never imagined I'd be back in my childhood bedroom, staring at the same water stain on the ceiling that looked like a dragon when I was 12. 3 months after my relationship imploded, I found myself unpacking boxes in my mother's house in Maple Crest, a cookie-cutter subdivision in Riverton, where the lawns are measured with rulers and gossip travels faster than Amazon deliveries. The house hadn't changed much, but the man living in it had. Calvin Dross had married my mother 5 years ago, sliding into our lives with his pressed khakis and clipboard, already serving as the HOA treasurer. He'd seemed harmless enough at first, just another middle-aged guy with a power trip about lawn height, but living under his roof revealed a different creature entirely. The garage door stays closed except for cars entering or exiting, he announced my first morning back, tapping his laminated house rules. Packages get retrieved within 30 minutes of delivery, no lingering outside after dark, and absolutely no fraternizing with neighbors beyond a polite wave. My mother, Elaine, stirred her coffee nervously. Calvin just likes things orderly. Honey, it keeps the neighborhood running smoothly. I work as a process control specialist at Northfield Systems, which is a fancy way of saying I spot patterns and inefficiencies for a living. My brain doesn't turn off at 5 o'clock. It's always cataloging, analyzing, connecting dots, and Calvin's rules weren't just controlling, they were designed to isolate. The HOA fees had jumped 40% since January. The newsletter, which Calvin personally edited and distributed, cited necessary infrastructure improvements and proactive maintenance scheduling. But walking through Maple Crest, I couldn't spot any actual improvements. The playground equipment was the same sun-faded plastic from the early 2000s. The community pool house still had the broken window from last summer's storm, patched with plywood and duct tape. I met Nora Keaton on a Tuesday evening when I was dragging the recycling bin to the curb. She lived 3 houses down with her husband Paul, both retired teachers who'd transformed their boredom into civic engagement. "You're Elaine's daughter," Nora said. Not really a question. "I remember when you used to ride your bike in circles in the cul-de-sac." "Guilty," I admitted. "Though these days I'm more likely to circle spreadsheets." She laughed, a warm sound that made me realize how quiet our house had become. "Well, if you ever want to join our neighborhood watch meetings, we stream them live every Thursday at 7. It's mostly Paul complaining about speed bumps, but sometimes we get actual civic engagement." Calvin appeared on the porch as if summoned by the mention of civic anything. He didn't say a word, just stood there with his arms crossed until I wheeled the bin to its designated spot and walked back inside. "I don't want you talking to the Keatons," he said later at dinner, cutting his chicken into precise cubes. "They're troublemakers, always questioning HOA decisions, demanding to see receipts. Paul tried to audit our books last year." "And?" I asked. His fork paused midway to his mouth. "And nothing. The books are in perfect order, but that kind of scrutiny creates an atmosphere of distrust. We're a community here, not a corporation." My mother's hand found mine under the table, a gentle squeeze that meant, "Please don't." But my brain was already working, filing away this reaction, comparing it to the defensive suppliers I'd investigated at work who turned out to be padding invoices. Calvin's jaw had tightened at the word audit. His left eye had twitched at receipts. That night, I lay in my teenage bed, listening to the house settle. The central air kicked on every 45 minutes, ran for 12 minutes, then shut off. Inefficient for a house this size. The homeowners association fee was $280 a month, up from $200 in January. Multiply that by 247 homes in Maple Crest, and we were talking about nearly $20,000 extra per month flowing into HOA coffers. for infrastructure improvements that didn't exist. Calvin had made one mistake in his welcome home lecture. He'd revealed his fear. The Keatons weren't troublemakers because they threw loud parties or let their grass grow wild. They were troublemakers because they asked questions. And I'd built my entire career on asking the right questions. The patterns emerged slowly at first, like a photograph developing in reverse. I'd requested copies of the HOA newsletters from the past year, public documents that Calvin couldn't deny me without raising suspicions. Sitting at my childhood desk, I spread them out chronologically, highlighting every mentioned expense. Parking lot resealing, Harbor Ridge maintenance, 8,500. That was March. The accompanying photo showed fresh black asphalt with crisp yellow lines. Parking lot resealing, Harbor Ridge maintenance, 8,500. June's newsletter. But the photo was identical. Same angle, same shadow from the oak tree, even the same Honda Civic parked in spot 15. My process control instincts kicked into overdrive. I grabbed a magnifying glass from my old school supplies and examined the photos closely. There, in the March photo, barely visible in the corner, was a date stamp from the previous year. Harbor Ridge maintenance appeared everywhere. Landscape trimming, snow removal, in a region that got maybe 2 inches per winter, power washing, fence repairs, always the same amounts, always the same vague descriptions. The authorization signature was Calvin's, but curiously, the contractor's signature was just an illegible scrawl, except it wasn't illegible to someone who'd spent years analyzing handwriting variations in forged shipping documents. The loops and pressure points matched Calvin's own signature, just tilted 15 degrees counterclockwise. Working late? My mother appeared in the doorway with a mug of chamomile tea. She'd started bringing me tea every night, a peace offering for the tension that had settled over the house like dust. Just catching up on neighborhood news, I said, casually closing the newsletter. Did you know they reseal the parking lot 4 times a year? She frowned. That seems excessive. That's because it is. I turned to face her. Mom, have you ever looked at the HOA financial statements? Calvin handles all that. He says it's too complicated. All those regulations and tax codes. He shows them at the annual meeting though, right? Oh, well. She fidgeted with her wedding ring. The meetings are during my book club. Calvin says 1 representative per household is sufficient. Of course he did. I'd seen this before at Northfield. Vendors who insisted on dealing with only 1 point of contact, who scheduled critical meetings when key stakeholders were unavailable. It was Control 101. Limit the number of eyes on your work. The next morning, Calvin announced a new house rule over breakfast. I'll be collecting all mail from now on. For security purposes, too many reports of mail theft in the county. I watched him gather the stack of envelopes, his fingers lingering on a thick manila envelope addressed to me from the county clerk's office. The business registration documents I'd requested for Harbor Ridge maintenance. I can take mine, I offered, reaching for the envelope. He pulled it back. I'll leave it on your bed after I've logged it. Need to track what's coming in and out. HOA suggestion for improving neighborhood security. Since when does the HOA make suggestions about private mail handling? His smile was tight. Since we started taking security seriously, you'd understand if you attended meetings instead of chatting with troublemakers at the fence. That afternoon, while Calvin was at his weekly golf game, I found the envelope on my bed. Opened. The documents inside confirmed what I'd suspected. Harbor Ridge Maintenance LLC was registered to a D. Cross at a P.O. box in the next town over. Cross, not Dross, but close enough for a hurried filing. The registered agent? Dross Solutions LLC, a company I found with a bit more digging was owned by Calvin's cousin in Delaware. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Saw Calvin checking your mail. Coffee tomorrow? Nora. I glanced out my window. Nora was in her garden, pretending to deadhead roses while keeping an eye on our house. When our eyes met, she gave a subtle nod toward the fence between our properties. That evening, Calvin made a point of reviewing the house rules again at dinner, adding a new one. No sharing of HOA-related documents with non-board members. That includes financial statements, newsletters, and any correspondence. Violation will result in immediate eviction. Calvin, my mother protested weakly, she's my daughter, not a tenant. Everyone under this roof follows the rules. Elaine, no exceptions. He turned to me. Your process control work must teach you the importance of confidentiality. I'm sure you understand. I understood perfectly. He knew I was looking, and now he was showing his cards, betting that the threat of homelessness would be enough to shut me down. He'd forgotten one thing. I'd learned my poker face in conference rooms full of executives trying to hide million-dollar discrepancies, and I'd already made copies of everything. The June evening was thick with humidity when everything unraveled. I'd waited until Calvin's Lexus disappeared around the corner for his weekly poker game before stepping outside. The fireflies were just beginning their dance as I walked to the property line where Nora was watering her hostas. The playground renovation fund is interesting, I said quietly, pretending to admire her garden. 40,000 collected, but the equipment quote from last year was only 15. Nora's eyes sharpened. Paul tried to bring that up at the last meeting. Calvin said costs had increased, needed multiple approvals, permits, safety inspections. The permit office shows no applications filed for Maple Crest playground work. She set down her watering can. How deep does this go? Deep enough that he's monitoring my mail. I found shell companies, duplicate billings. The porch light blazed on like a spotlight. Calvin stood in the doorway, still in his golf attire, face twisted with rage. He must have doubled back, probably watching from down the street. Get inside, now. His voice carried across the yard with a violence that made Nora step back. I'm having a conversation with our neighbor, I said, keeping my tone level despite my hammering heart. He stormed across the lawn, his face flushed beyond what the evening heat could explain. Up close, I could smell whiskey on his breath, liquid courage from his abandoned poker game. You think you're clever? He positioned himself between Nora and me, his back to her. Stirring up trouble? Asking questions? I know exactly what you're doing. Then you know I'm doing my civic duty as a homeowner. His hand shot out, grabbing my upper arm hard enough to bruise. You're not a homeowner. You're a guest who's worn out her welcome. One more word to anyone about HOA business and what, Calvin? I yanked my arm free. You'll forge more maintenance bills? Create another shell company? The color drained from his face, then flooded back darker. You have no idea who you're messing with. I've got connections you can't imagine. One phone call and your job disappears. One complaint to the right people and your mother loses everything in the divorce. Is that a threat? It's a promise. He leaned closer, voice dropping to a harsh whisper. Keep your mouth shut, or I'll shut it for you. And if I see you talking to any neighbor again, you'll regret it. Neither of us had noticed the small crowd gathering. Paul stood on his porch with his phone raised. The Hendersons from across the street had come out, their Ring doorbell's blue light glowing. Mrs. Palmer from 2 doors down was pretending to check her mail while obviously recording. But most importantly, what none of us knew in that moment, what Calvin certainly didn't know, was that Thursday's neighborhood watch meeting was streaming live. Nora had been logged in on her tablet, propped on the porch railing, broadcasting our entire confrontation to 43 households. Sir, step away from the lady, Paul's military training showed in his stance as he approached. That sounded like assault and threats. I've already called 911. Calvin spun around, finally noticing our audience. His politician's smile flickered on, but it couldn't mask the panic in his eyes. Just a family disagreement. Paul, nothing to concern yourself with. Didn't sound like family disagreement to me. Mrs. Palmer called out. Sounded like criminal threats and extortion. The sirens were already audible in the distance. Calvin's head swiveled between the gathering neighbors and me, calculating. Then he made his second crucial mistake of the evening. You're all witnessing nothing but a hysterical woman making baseless accusations, he announced loudly. I've done nothing but serve this community faithfully for 5 years. If anyone should be investigated, it's her, he pointed at me. for harassment and defamation. Then you won't mind a full audit of the HOA books, Paul said calmly, to clear your good name. The Riverton police cruiser turned onto our street, its headlights sweeping across Calvin's trapped expression. He took 2 steps toward the house, then stopped, realizing how guilty flight would look. I pulled out my phone, hands surprisingly steady. I'll be filing a report for assault and threats, and I have documentation of financial irregularities I'll be sharing with the proper authorities.
You have nothing, he snarled, but the bravado was cracking.
She has a neighborhood full of witnesses, Nora said, holding up her tablet, including everyone watching the watch meeting stream. Amazing how technology captures things we don't expect, isn't it? Just like those doorbell cameras that recorded you threatening a resident for exercising her First Amendment rights. The officers approached, their body cameras adding another layer of documentation to the night's events. As I gave my statement, I watched Calvin's world begin its inevitable collapse, one recorded word at a time. The fireflies continued their ancient dance, indifferent to the human drama below, while the digital eyes of the neighborhood captured every moment of Calvin's spectacular miscalculation. He'd thought darkness would hide his threats. He'd forgotten that in Maple Crest, someone was always watching. The Riverton Public Library became my war room. 3 days after filing the police report, I commandeered a corner table and transformed it into a forensic accounting lab. My process control training had taught me that every system leaves tracks, and Calvin's system was bleeding evidence. I started with public records, HOA meeting minutes stretching back 5 years. The pattern was elegant in its simplicity. Every major expense followed the same trajectory. Problem identified. Single bid submitted. Calvin's recommendation. Unanimous board approval. No competitive bidding. No second opinions. No dissenting votes. The board members, I discovered, were all recent appointees who'd replaced long-standing members after mysterious scheduling conflicts forced resignations. The receipts told their own story. Harbor Ridge Maintenance had billed for snow removal on March 15th, when the temperature hit 72 degrees. They'd charged for emergency fence repair, the same week in 4 consecutive months, always Section D, always $3,200. The accompanying photos were subtly different angles of the same repair, the wood grain patterns identical when overlaid. Find anything interesting? A woman in a sharp blazer sat down across from me. Sarah Martinez, Riverton Integrity Unit. I'd contacted the RIU 2 days earlier, expecting bureaucratic runaround. Instead, here was their senior investigator with a leather portfolio and keen eyes. Depends on your definition of interesting, I said, sliding a spreadsheet across the table. I'd call systematic embezzlement over 5 years interesting. She studied my analysis, transactions mapped, shell companies traced, duplicate payments highlighted. You've done half our job for us. What made you start looking? I analyze processes for a living. Calvin's process was too clean, too consistent. Real maintenance is messy, unpredictable. This was theater. Sarah pulled out her tablet. Walk me through the money flow. I'd created a flowchart worthy of a corporate presentation. Maple Crest HOA pays Harbor Ridge Maintenance, registered to D, Cross, likely a typo for Dross. Harbor Ridge is managed by Dross Solutions LLC, owned by Calvin's cousin Derek in Delaware. Dross Solutions invoices Harbor Ridge for consulting services that eat up 80% of each payment. The remaining 20% goes to actual contractors who do minimal work, enough to have something to photograph. The classic management fee shuffle. Sarah nodded. How much are we talking? Conservative estimate? $400,000 over 3 years. But here's where it gets interesting. I pulled out another file. Harbor Ridge also has contracts with 4 other HOAs in the county, all referred by Calvin at various community association meetings. Sarah's eyebrows rose. He franchised his fraud? Every HOA shows the same patterns, same amounts, same schedules, same phantom repairs. Weston Meadows paid for pool resurfacing 3 times in 18 months. Riverside Commons has been getting its parking lot sealed quarterly since 2019. You have documentation for all of this? I gestured to my color-coded files. Public records, state business registrations, county permits, tax filings, everything legally obtainable. I also have sworn statements from contractors who were approached by Harbor Ridge for small jobs that were then inflated on invoices they never saw. Sarah was typing rapidly. We'll need to freeze the HOA accounts immediately. Can you testify to your findings? Already prepared a formal report, but Calvin will fight this. He's threatening my job. My mother's assets. Not anymore. Sarah's smile was sharp. Threatening a witness in a financial crimes investigation is a federal offense. We'll be having a chat with Mr. Dross about that. Meanwhile, I suggest you attend Thursday's emergency HOA meeting. Emergency meeting? The one the legitimate board members are calling after viewing your evidence. Turns out 3 of them never actually resigned. Calvin just stopped notifying them of meetings and told everyone they'd quit. I spent the rest of the week refining my presentation, creating visual aids that would make the fraud undeniable even to neighbors who thought forensic accounting was a TV show. Paul and Nora helped me test the presentation, suggesting simplifications that maintained accuracy while ensuring clarity. My mother, meanwhile, had grown quieter each day. She'd found Calvin's hidden files while packing his things. He'd moved to a hotel after the arrest, but hadn't retrieved his home office contents, bank statements for accounts she didn't know existed, receipts for purchases never discussed, a whole financial life running parallel to their marriage. I was such a fool, she said Wednesday night, holding a credit card statement showing charges to Delaware shell companies. He fooled everyone, Mom. That's what con artists do. But I lived with him. I should have seen. You saw what he wanted you to see. That's why he isolated us, controlled the mail, kept you away from meetings. You weren't a fool. You were a mark. She managed a weak smile. My daughter, the fraud investigator, when did you grow up to be so formidable? Somewhere between spreadsheet analysis and learning to spot forged signatures. Thursday couldn't come fast enough. The trap was set. The evidence organized. The community awakened. Calvin had built his empire on a foundation of apathy and trust. I was about to show him what happened when someone started paying attention. The restraining order was just the beginning. My lawyer, Janet Torres, a friend from college who'd traded corporate law for protecting whistleblowers, filed it Monday morning, by noon. Calvin was legally required to stay 500 feet away from me and cease all direct or indirect contact. He's already violated it twice, Janet informed me Tuesday afternoon. Once through his lawyer demanding you cease defamation, and once through a proxy asking your mother to convince you to drop everything. Let me guess, the proxy was Derek from Delaware? Close, Derek's wife, calling from a burner phone. We traced it. Janet's grin was predatory. Every violation strengthens our case. I'd moved into a furnished studio apartment downtown, a colleague's investment property offered at a friend's rate. The space was small but secure, with a doorman who took his job seriously and security cameras in every hallway. More importantly, it was my name on the lease, my rules, my sanctuary. The HOA emergency meeting was Thursday. I had 3 days to ensure everything was bulletproof. Sarah Martinez from the RIU had fast-tracked the investigation after reviewing my evidence, issuing administrative subpoenas that revealed the scope of Calvin's network. It's bigger than we thought, she told me Wednesday morning. Derek Dross has similar arrangements with HOAs in 3 states. Your stepfather was the pilot program. I spent Wednesday afternoon with Paul and Nora, rehearsing the presentation. They'd mobilized the legitimate board members, the ones Calvin had systematically excluded, and ensured a quorum would be present. We've got 70 households confirmed, Paul reported, plus another 30 joining virtually. Biggest turnout in Maple Crest history. Calvin won't show, Nora predicted. His lawyer will claim it's harassment. Doesn't matter, I said. The evidence speaks for itself. But I'd underestimated Calvin's arrogance. Thursday evening, I arrived at the community center to find his Lexus in the parking lot. Through the glass doors, I could see him at the board table, wearing his treasurer's blazer, acting as if nothing had happened. He can't be within 500 feet of you, Janet reminded me through my earpiece. She was attending virtually, ready to document any violations. Then he'll have to leave when I enter, I said. His choice. The community center was packed. Neighbors I'd never seen at meetings filled every chair, lined the walls, spilled into the hallway. The atmosphere crackled with the energy of a community awakening. Calvin's smile faltered when I walked in. He glanced at his lawyer, who whispered urgently in his ear. They'd banked on me being too intimidated to show up. Mr. Dross needs to leave immediately. Janet's voice carried through the speaker system. Paul had connected her to the AV setup. He's in violation of a protective order. This is a public meeting, Calvin's lawyer protested. My client has every right. Not within 500 feet of my client, Janet interrupted. Leave now or I call the police. The room watched Calvin's face cycle through emotions. Rage, disbelief, calculation. Finally, he stood, straightening his blazer. This is a witch hunt, he announced. I've served this community faithfully. Then you won't mind a full audit, called out Mrs. Palmer. Right, Calvin? He strode out, his lawyer scrambling after him. The moment the door closed, the room exhaled collectively. Paul took the podium. Now that the trash has taken itself out, let's begin. I presented for 45 minutes, walking through each scheme with surgical precision. The seasonal snow removal in a barely winter climate, the monthly fence repairs to the same non-existent damage, the playground equipment fund that had gathered dust while children played on rusted swings. The neighbors' faces transformed from confusion to understanding to anger. When I showed the shell company documentation, several people gasped. When I displayed the forged contractor signatures, someone shouted, "That's wire fraud!" The Riverton Integrity Unit has frozen all HOA accounts pending investigation, I continued. They've identified $480,000 in suspicious transactions over 3 years. Every household has been overcharged approximately $1,945. What about criminal charges? Someone called out. Sarah Martinez stood up from the back row. The DA's office is preparing multiple felony charges. We're also coordinating with federal authorities regarding interstate fraud. The vote to remove Calvin as treasurer was unanimous. The vote to pursue full legal action was unanimous. The vote to implement new financial controls, requiring 3 signatures, monthly audits, competitive bidding, unanimous. As the meeting concluded, neighbors approached me with stories. The phantom roof repair that never happened, the landscaping contract for common areas that didn't exist, the security system that was never installed despite quarterly payments. You did what we were too afraid to do, an elderly man said, shaking my hand. Calvin counted on us being too polite to question him. Outside, I found my mother waiting by her car. She looked older but somehow lighter, as if shedding Calvin's control had removed a physical weight. Janet says the divorce will be straightforward, she said. Calvin's hidden assets make it fraud against the marital estate. I'll get the house and damages. I'm sorry, Mom, about all of it. She hugged me fiercely. I'm not. You showed me who he really was. You saved me from years more of lies. As I drove back to my studio, I thought about Calvin's empire of petty theft and grand deception, built on the assumption that good people don't question authority. He'd forgotten that sometimes. Good people come home, ask uncomfortable questions, and refuse to be silenced. The real revenge was just beginning. The Maple Crest Community Center had never seen such a crowd. Every seat filled, people standing along the walls, the overflow room's video feed packed. This wasn't just another HOA meeting. This was a reckoning. I sat in the front row with my evidence boxes. Janet on my right, Sarah Martinez on my left, across the aisle. Calvin sat rigid between his lawyer and Derek, who'd flown in from Delaware looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. The legitimate board members occupied the head table, having reclaimed their positions after Calvin's forced exit. This emergency session is called to order, announced Patricia Wells, the reinstated board president. We're here to address systematic financial irregularities spanning 5 years of HOA operations. Calvin's lawyer immediately stood. We object to this kangaroo court. My client has served. Sit down, counselor. Patricia cut him off. This is a community meeting, not your courtroom. Your client will have his chance to respond after the evidence is presented. I took the podium, my hands steady despite the weight of the moment. Behind me, Paul had set up a projection screen displaying the first slide, Following the Money, a systematic analysis of HOA fraud. Good evening. What I'm about to show you isn't speculation or vendetta. It's documented fact, verified by the Riverton Integrity Unit and corroborated by independent forensic accountants. The room was silent as I walked through the evidence methodically. Transaction records, shell company registrations, forged signatures, phantom repairs. Each slide built upon the last, creating an undeniable picture of deliberate, sustained theft. Exhibit 47, I clicked to a new slide. Harbor Ridge Maintenance billed for emergency tree removal on Oak Street. The invoice shows $6,000. The problem? Oak Street has no trees. It's been a cul-de-sac of townhomes with decorative lampposts since 2003. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Calvin's face had gone from red to pale as each piece of evidence mounted. But the most damaging evidence, I continued, came from an unexpected source. I clicked to the next slide, an audio waveform. This is from Thursday's Neighborhood Watch livestream, archived on their public channel. Calvin's recorded voice filled the room. Keep your mouth shut, or I'll shut it for you. Then another recording, this one from a doorbell camera. One phone call and your job disappears. One complaint to the right people, and your mother loses everything. Threatening a witness, Sarah Martinez stood up, is a federal offense. It also demonstrates consciousness of guilt. Calvin shot to his feet. This is character assassination. I've done nothing but steal from your neighbors. Patricia interrupted. Sit down, Calvin. You'll have your turn. I presented for another 20 minutes, showing the Derek connection, the multi-state pattern, the kickback structure. When I finished, the room was electric with anger. The floor is now open for Calvin Dross to respond, Patricia announced. Calvin approached the podium, his usual commanding presence diminished. These are misunderstandings, accounting errors. I've always acted in the community's best. Then explain the signatures, someone called out. Why do your signatures match Harbor Ridge's? Explain the duplicate photos, another voice demanded. Same damage, different months. Calvin's lawyer whispered urgently in his ear. Finally, Calvin said, on advice of counsel, I decline to answer. The room erupted. Patricia gavelled for order. Then we'll proceed to vote. All in favor of immediate termination of Calvin Dross as treasurer? Every hand shot up. The virtual attendees' votes scrolled on screen. Unanimous. All in favor of pursuing full criminal prosecution and civil recovery? Again, unanimous. All in favor of forensic audit of all HOA finances dating back 7 years? Unanimous. Sarah Martinez stood again. Mr. Dross, the Riverton Integrity Unit is prepared to offer a plea arrangement, full restitution, testimony against your co-conspirators, 5 years minimum security. You have 48 hours to decide. Derek jumped up. I want a separate deal. This was all Calvin's idea. I just managed some paperwork. Shut up, Calvin snarled, his mask finally slipping completely. Motion to ban Calvin Dross from all HOA positions in perpetuity, Patricia announced. Unanimous. As the meeting broke up, neighbors surrounded me with thanks and questions. Calvin was escorted out by his increasingly nervous lawyer, Derek trailing behind making frantic phone calls. You did it, Nora hugged me. You actually did it. We did it, I corrected. The whole neighborhood. My mother appeared through the crowd, tears streaming down her face. The lawyer called. Calvin signed the divorce papers. He's giving me everything. The house, the savings, his pension portion. His lawyer said fighting would only add ammunition to the criminal case. Outside, red and blue lights flashed. 2 federal agents were placing Calvin in handcuffs as he screamed about conspiracies and setups. Derek was already in the back of another car, presumably having realized cooperation was his only play. I stood on the community center steps, watching Calvin's empire crumble in real time. 5 years of theft, ended by one person refusing to be silenced. The audit would reveal more. Sarah had hinted at victim funds in 6 figures. But tonight was about something bigger than money. It was about a community reclaiming its power from a petty tyrant who'd mistaken silence for submission. "Pizza at my place," Paul announced to the lingering crowd, to celebrate Ava, who reminded us that fighting back is always an option. As neighbors headed to Paul's, I looked back at the community center. Through the window, I could see Patricia and the legitimate board members already at work, laptops open, beginning the long process of rebuilding trust. Calvin had stolen more than money. He'd stolen faith in the system. Tonight, we'd taken both back. The federal courthouse in downtown Riverton stood like a monument to justice delayed but not denied. 6 months after that explosive Thursday night meeting, I walked up its limestone steps in my best suit, subpoena in hand, ready to testify. The investigation had grown beyond anyone's imagination. What started as one HOA's missing funds had exploded into a multi-state fraud case. The FBI had taken over from the local RIU, tracking Derek's network across 7 states, 43 HOAs, and nearly $3 million in stolen funds. Inside courtroom 4B, I took my seat in the witness section. Calvin sat at the defendant's table, his orange jumpsuit a far cry from his pressed khakis and HOA blazer. He'd lost weight, aged years and months. His eyes, when they briefly met mine, held nothing but venom. Derek had flipped immediately, providing passwords, bank records, and testimony in exchange for a reduced sentence. His cooperation had been thorough, too thorough for Calvin's comfort, judging by the way he refused to look at his cousin. "The United States calls Ava Whitmore," the prosecutor announced. I took the stand, placing my hand on the Bible, swearing to tell the truth that had started with strange fees and ended with federal indictments. "Ms. Whitmore," the prosecutor began, "please tell the court how you first became suspicious of the defendant's activities." For 2 hours, I walked through my discovery process, the duplicate invoices, the shell companies, the pattern recognition that my career had trained me to see. I presented each piece of evidence as I had at the HOA meeting, but now with the weight of sworn testimony. "Objection," Calvin's lawyer interrupted repeatedly. "Speculation, hearsay, beyond the witness's expertise." Each time, the judge overruled. My documentation was solid, my expertise established, my testimony corroborated by physical evidence. "The defense may cross-examine," the judge announced after the prosecution finished. Calvin's lawyer approached like a shark scenting blood. "Ms. Whitmore, isn't it true you were living rent-free in the defendant's home?" "My mother's home," I corrected, "where I paid utilities and groceries." "And isn't it true you initiated this investigation out of personal animosity?" "I initiated it because I recognized fraudulent patterns. My personal feelings about Calvin are irrelevant to forged signatures and fake invoices." He tried for an hour to shake me, to paint me as a vindictive stepdaughter. Each attempt failed against the wall of documentation I'd built. "No further questions," he finally conceded. The trial continued for 3 days. Neighbors testified about work never performed. Legitimate contractors confirmed they'd never seen the invoices bearing their forged signatures. Sarah Martinez presented the forensic accounting that traced every dollar. My mother testified on day 3, describing Calvin's control tactics, the hidden accounts, the threats. Her voice was steady as she detailed finding credit cards she'd never known about, debts accumulated in her name, a reverse mortgage he'd tried to process without her knowledge. "He isolated me," she told the court, "made me feel stupid for asking questions, said financial matters were too complicated for me to understand. I believed him until my daughter showed me the truth." The most damaging testimony came from Derek himself. In exchange for 5 years instead of 20, he laid out the entire operation, how Calvin had recruited him, how they'd identified vulnerable HOAs with disengaged residents, how they'd systematically replaced board members with plants or pushed out anyone who asked questions. Calvin called it harvesting, Derek testified. Said these rich neighborhoods would never miss the money, said they deserved it for being too lazy to pay attention. On the final day, Calvin took the stand against his lawyer's advice. His arrogance, even facing decades in prison, wouldn't let him stay silent. "I served those communities," he insisted. "Every dollar was accounted for. These people are twisting facts because they never liked me." The prosecutor's cross-examination was surgical. She presented each forged document, asking Calvin to explain the signatures. She showed the phantom repairs, demanding he point out the work completed. She played the audio of his threats, asking him to explain what he'd meant. By the end, Calvin was sweating, stumbling over answers, contradicting his earlier statements. His mask of civic service had finally, completely shattered. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. As they filed back in, I held my breath. On count 1, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On count 2, money laundering, we find the defendant guilty. The guilty verdicts continued through all 18 counts. Calvin's face went gray as each one was read. Sentencing would come later, but the prosecutor told us to expect 15 to 20 years. The civil case would follow, with the HOAs positioned to recover most of their losses from Calvin's seized assets and insurance policies. Outside the courthouse, neighbors from Maple Crest and the other affected HOAs gathered. Some cried, some hugged, all looked relieved. "You gave us our power back," Patricia Wells said, shaking my hand. "You showed us we didn't have to accept being victims." As I walked down those limestone steps, I thought about the night this all started. A conversation at a fence, a man who thought darkness and threats could hide his crimes, a neighborhood that found its voice when one person refused to be silenced. Calvin was right about one thing. I had destroyed his life, but he'd built that life on the theft of trust and money from good people who'd made the mistake of believing in him. Justice, I'd learned, sometimes comes disguised as a process control specialist who knows how to read patterns and refuses to shut up about them. The final gavel fell on a gray December morning in courtroom 4B. Judge Harrison's voice carried the weight of justice as she read the sentence. "Calvin Dross, you are hereby sentenced to 18 years in federal prison for conspiracy, wire fraud, and money laundering. Additionally, you are ordered to pay restitution of $2.3 million to the affected homeowners associations." Calvin stood rigid as the bailiffs approached with shackles. His lawyer had negotiated frantically until the end, but the evidence was insurmountable. As they led him away, he turned one last time. Our eyes met across the courtroom, his filled with hatred, mine with something closer to pity. He'd had everything and thrown it away for greed. The civil proceedings wrapped up that same week. My mother's divorce had been finalized months earlier, with Calvin forced to sign over the house and all shared assets to avoid additional fraud charges. She sat beside me as the judge approved the final settlement, her hand squeezing mine when the bailiff announced, "All HOA funds are to be returned with interest. Mr. Dross's personal assets, including 3 properties and multiple investment accounts, will be liquidated to satisfy the judgment." "Congratulations, Elaine," Janet Torres said as we exited the courthouse. "You're free, completely free." My mother smiled, really smiled, for the first time in months. Free and significantly wealthier than when I married him, thanks to the settlement. Turns out hiding assets in a marriage is expensive when you get caught. The HOA had already elected new leadership, implemented triple signature requirements, and mandated quarterly public audits. Patricia Wells had instituted what she called radical transparency. Every expense posted online, every contract open for review, every meeting streamed and archived. We learned our lesson. Patricia told me at the final HOA meeting I attended, "Comfort and trust without verification is how predators thrive." Standing before the packed community center one last time, I handed over boxes of organized documentation to the new treasurer. Every receipt, every analysis, Every piece of evidence. It's yours now. Guard it well." The room erupted in applause. Paul stood first, followed by Nora, then the entire assembly. These people who'd been victims had become vigilant guardians of their own interests, and they had me to thank for showing them how. "Speech," someone called out. I laughed, shaking my head. I just did what anyone would do. I saw something wrong and refused to ignore it. "Most people would have stayed quiet," Nora said. "You risked your home, your safety, your relationship with your mother. That takes courage." "Or stubbornness," I admitted. "Ask my mother. I've never been good at letting things go." The meeting ended with the board voting to establish the Whitmore Fund, a legal defense resource for any resident who uncovered fraud or malfeasance. They'd learned that sometimes protecting the community meant protecting the whistleblowers. A week later, I was back in my office at Northfield Systems, analyzing supply chain inefficiencies like nothing had happened, but everything had changed. My colleagues looked at me differently now. The woman who'd taken down a multi-state fraud ring. My boss had already promoted me to senior process analyst with a substantial raise, joking that he wanted to keep me happy so I wouldn't investigate him. My mother sold the house 6 months later, moving to a condo downtown. "Too many memories," she explained, though I knew she meant too many lies. She'd started dating again, a retired teacher Paul had introduced her to, who thought HOA drama was fascinating dinner conversation. The other HOAs affected by Calvin's scheme reached out over the following months. I consulted on 3 forensic audits, helped establish oversight protocols, and even testified at 2 more trials of Calvin's co-conspirators. Each community had the same story: trust exploited, vigilance abandoned, theft disguised as service. Derek served 3 years of his 5-year sentence, released early for good behavior and continued cooperation. He sent me a letter once, thanking me for exposing what he called the trap I couldn't escape. I didn't reply. Some bridges deserve to stay burned. Calvin, according to the Federal Prisoner Database, remains at the medium security facility in Otisville, New York. He'll be eligible for parole in 2039. By then, the children playing on Maple Crest's finely renovated playground will be adults, probably serving on their own HOA boards, hopefully remembering the cautionary tale of the treasurer who stole from trust. Standing at my apartment window now, looking out at a city full of neighborhoods and HOAs and small democracies built on faith, I think about power, how it corrupts, certainly, but also how it crumbles when someone simply says, "Prove it," and means it. My phone buzzes with a text from Nora. "Channel 6 wants to interview you for a documentary about HOA fraud. Interested?" I smile, typing back, only if they title it "Following the Money, a Cautionary Tale." Because that's what this was. In the end, not just my story or Calvin's downfall, but a reminder that ordinary people, armed with spreadsheets and stubbornness, can topple titans who mistake silence for permission. The revenge wasn't in Calvin's sentence or the money recovered. It was in every neighbor who now reads the fine print, questions the expenses, and shows up to meetings. It was in transforming a community from victims to vigilant citizens. And it all started with a conversation at a fence, on a humid June evening, when a bully thought darkness would hide his threats. He was wrong. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If you enjoyed this tale of justice served, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. What would you have done in Ava's situation? I read every comment and can't wait to hear your perspectives.